For centuries, people across the world have whispered tales of dragons. Great winged beasts, scales harder than steel, eyes glowing with fire, and a roar that could shake mountains. Most dismiss these stories as pure myth, products of imagination or warnings crafted by elders to instill fear. But what if the legend of the dragon was never a myth at all? What if its origins were rooted in something real, something that once walked this earth and left behind traces that time has tried to erase? Our journey begins in the high mountains of Central Asia, where ancient civilizations carved strange creatures into stone walls. These carvings, preserved through winds and centuries, show beasts with elongated bodies, wings stretched wide, and flames curling from their jaws. They were not random doodles. Each carving followed a pattern, a memory etched into rock, as though the artists had seen something with their own eyes. Early explorers who stumbled across these carvings dismissed them as symbolic representations of storms, floods, or volcanic eruptions. Yet, the people who lived in those mountains told a different story. They spoke of the sky serpent, a creature so vast it blocked out the sun, its shadow sweeping over valleys like an eclipse. The ground trembled when it landed, and the air reeked of sulfur after it departed. Scholars began to wonder, was the dragon merely a metaphor, or had these ancient witnesses seen something we no longer believe possible? Some proposed the existence of gigantic reptiles that survived long past the extinction of the dinosaurs, their bones buried deep under shifting earth. Others believed in a more supernatural explanation, that the dragon was a guardian, a messenger from the heavens, arriving in times of great change to warn humanity. In forgotten manuscripts stored within temples and monasteries, scattered across Asia and later in medieval Europe, the descriptions were disturbingly similar. Always the wings. Always the fire. Always the terror. How could cultures separated by oceans and centuries describe the same beast? One record, written in the ink of fear, told of entire villages vanishing overnight. Fields burned black, livestock reduced to ash, and survivors whispering that a monstrous shadow passed overhead. Another text described a king who claimed to have tamed such a beast, riding it into battle and using its fury to subdue rival kingdoms. Whether fact or propaganda, these stories spread like wildfire, fueling the dragon's place in myth. But even in the age of science, the mystery lingers. Archaeologists have found strange bones that do not fit any known creature. Gigantic skull fragments with teeth longer than a man's hand. Fossilized remains that hint at wings large enough to lift a beast heavier than an elephant. While the official verdict remains inconclusive, whispers among researchers suggest a truth that governments and institutions hesitate to admit: humanity may not have been alone at the top of the food chain. The dragon, whether flesh and blood or born of divine fire, may have been as real as the animals we know today. And if it was real, the question is not whether it existed, but what happened to it. The story does not end in the mountains. It continues across continents, weaving through cultures and leaving behind marks of fear and awe. In the next chapter, we journey into the medieval world, where the dragon did more than live in legend. It shaped kingdoms, faith, and destiny. As centuries passed, the legend of the dragon did not fade, it grew stronger, spreading across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East like wildfire carried on the wind. In medieval times, when kingdoms were built on faith, swords, and fear, dragons became more than just beasts of myth. They became symbols of power, terror, and divine judgment. In Europe, whispers of dragons took root in villages surrounded by forests and swamps. Farmers spoke of creatures that nested in caves, devouring livestock and poisoning rivers with their fiery breath. The peasants feared them, but kings and warlords saw an opportunity. To slay a dragon, or at least claim to have done so, was the ultimate proof of strength. It turned men into legends and rulers into gods. Knights rode out on quests, their banners raised high, seeking not only glory but the approval of the church. Priests declared dragons to be symbols of Satan himself, creatures sent to test the faith of mankind. When a knight plunged his sword into such a beast, it was not only a victory of man over monster, it was framed as God's triumph over evil. But beneath the shining armor and holy blessings, there were darker truths. Records from remote monasteries spoke of kings who kept dragon bones hidden in their treasuries, using them as relics to strengthen their claim to divine right. Some rulers even claimed to have bargained with the beasts, sacrificing prisoners and slaves in exchange for a dragon's protection during war. Whether these tales were true or political theater, they left an unshakable mark on history. Beyond Europe, dragons appeared in different forms, but with strikingly similar power. In West African traditions, fire-breathing serpents were said to guard sacred rivers and mountains, their wrath unleashed only when balance was disturbed. In the Middle East, scholars of the Abbasid Caliphate collected texts describing enormous winged reptiles in distant lands, stories that mirrored the European tales, yet came from entirely separate sources. This shared mythology, spread across cultures, could not be coincidence. It hinted at a common origin, perhaps a memory carried by ancient peoples who had once encountered something real, something so terrifying that its echo lasted for millennia. By the 13th century, dragons had become a weapon in the battle for influence. Monarchs commissioned tapestries and murals of themselves defeating monstrous beasts, ensuring that their people believed in both the danger of dragons and the bravery of their rulers. The church used dragon imagery to strengthen sermons, teaching that only through faith could humanity triumph over chaos. Yet behind the walls of castles and cathedrals, whispers persisted. There were those who believed the dragons had not vanished, but had been driven into hiding. Deep within the mountains, beneath the oceans, lurking in places where men dared not go, and in some cases, hidden beneath the very foundations of cities, watching as empires rose and fell. The medieval world shaped the dragon into myth, yes, but it also preserved the possibility that dragons were once real, their fire scorching not only fields, but the very destiny of mankind. But this was not the end. As science and exploration expanded in the centuries to come, evidence began to surface that forced even skeptics to reconsider. Bones, fossils, and strange sightings that could not be explained. The final chapter reveals how modern discovery collided with ancient legend and whether the dragon was truly gone or merely waiting for humanity to rediscover it. As the world stepped into the age of science, the dragon should have disappeared, reduced to nothing more than fantasy. Yet, instead of vanishing, the legend only grew stronger. The more humanity discovered, the more the line between myth and reality began to blur. In the 17th and 18th centuries, explorers returned from distant lands carrying strange stories of giant reptiles, crocodiles longer than boats, snakes thick as tree trunks, and lizards with frilled necks that seemed like miniature dragons. These creatures fed the imagination of scholars, who began to wonder if the dragon was not myth, but memory. Perhaps ancient people had encountered massive beasts, preserved in oral traditions, exaggerated by fear, and passed down for centuries. Then came the age of paleontology. Fossils of creatures larger than imagination were unearthed from the earth. Massive skulls with dagger-like teeth. Skeletons of winged reptiles with wingspans wider than houses. Dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and marine reptiles once thought impossible now stood as undeniable proof. Humanity had not invented dragons out of thin air, it had remembered them, distorted through the haze of time. The bones of the mighty Tyrannosaurus, the soaring Pteranodon, and the fierce Mosasaurus looked eerily similar to the dragons carved into stone centuries earlier. Could it be that dragons were the last echoes of these giants? Not monsters of magic, but survivors of a forgotten age? Yet the mystery deepened. In remote villages across Asia, Africa, and South America, there are still tales of winged serpents and fiery beasts. Travelers in the Congo speak of enormous reptiles lurking in swamps. Fishermen in the Pacific tell of sea serpents rising from the depths. Pilots over mountain ranges have reported shapes that no known animal should have. Each story dismissed as fantasy, but together they form a pattern too large to ignore. The dragon has become more than a beast, it is a mirror of humanity's fears and ambitions. In the East, it symbolizes wisdom, strength, and life-giving reign. In the West, it embodies chaos, destruction, and evil. Yet both visions speak to the same truth. The dragon is power incarnate. Power that mankind has always both feared and desired. Even in modern culture, the dragon refuses to die. From flags and family crests to blockbuster films and national myths, its image dominates. Why? Because somewhere deep inside, humanity knows that the dragon is more than a story. It is a memory, a warning, perhaps even a prophecy. Scientists today argue that the dragon is a composite of ancient fossils, crocodiles, and giant snakes. But others insist there is more, something still hidden, deep in unexplored jungles or beneath uncharted seas. For every mystery solved, another rises from the shadows. And so, the dragon endures. Not as a relic of the past, but as a question that refuses to be silenced. Did humanity invent the dragon, or did the dragon invent humanity's need for myth? The truth is this: civilizations rise, empires fall, but the dragon never sleeps. It waits in the cracks of history, in the forgotten corners of the earth, in the stories we pass down from parent to child. The dragon is not gone. It is eternal. And perhaps, one day, the world will come face to face with the last of its kind.